Going to cover Adobe Illustrator Classroom. We're in a book, Chapter 10, which is all about gradients, blends, and patterns, and we're going to be making this funky cake today. So go ahead and open up the L10 start file, and you get kind of something that looks a little bit like a Halloween Christmas card. So let's go ahead and do a file, save as, and call it L10 cake. And make sure you save it in your Lesson 10 folder, and save. Alright, so one of the first things we're going to do is play with the gradient on the frame of this card. So let's go ahead and grab our selection tool and grab the green box that is the background right now. I'm going to do a Control plus and kind of zoom in and see a little bit more. Alright, with our fill color, right here it's set as green. We want to go ahead and open our swatches option in case you don't have that already. And we want to grab the gradient swatch called black and white, or white black. And we'll go ahead and leave that open. And it's going to go ahead and apply that black and white gradient to our background. Now with the fill colors, we're going to go ahead and play with a few other things. Let's go ahead and go to Window and grab Gradient and have that down here. So we want to go ahead and adjust this color because we don't necessarily like the white and the black that we've got here right now. So we can do that by adjusting these color stops right here at the bottom. In the very first one, let's double click it, and it's going to pop up those swatches for us, and we want to go ahead and choose the one that says, it's kind of a light brown, says BG10. It's one of those custom colors that comes with the thing. So let's go BG10, and let's come down here, double click our end stop. And for our end, let's go ahead and we don't necessarily want one of these colors. Let's go to our palette so we can make our own color panel. And let's do the CMYK. Let's do C is 25, tab between, magenta 25, tab, yellow 25, and 0. So we get kind of a nice light brown kind of color. So now we've got that in our gradient as well. We can go ahead and hit escape and close that swatches down. So we want to go ahead and make sure we save this gradient so we can use it for later. So right here with our gradient menu, go right here next to where it says type and hit the drop down. And right here at the very bottom, we get an add to swatches. So we want to go ahead and make sure we add this to the swatches. And we can close up that gradient panel. With it still selected, let's go ahead and come into our fill color. And right now we get that new fill, the new gradient swatch that we just made. So let's double click it. And we can actually name it. So let's go ahead and name it background. And hit OK. So now we've got those two colors. So we can actually switch in our swatches between different kinds of swatches. So if you go down here to the bottom, you get this Show Swatches Kind menu. If you click, you can show just the gradient swatches. So now you can see the ones that are preset and that new background swatch that we just made. All right, let's go ahead and switch back to our Show All Swatches and do a Control S and save what we've got so far. So we can go ahead and play with this gradient. So if we double click on it, we're going to enter the isolation mode, and we can kind of see what we've got here in our gradient. If we go ahead and grab the gradient tool over here on the edge on our toolbar, we should be able to see, oh, we need to show view. I have it turned off from earlier. Alright, show gradient annotator. Okay, so you should have this bar showing with the two different circles that kind of tells you where you're at. So we can actually play with that gradient. We can grab this diamond and notice how that adjusts the midpoint. So because our colors are relatively similar, it's a little bit hard to tell, but you can tell it's getting darker and lighter. So we can also play with our gradient in the same way you could in Photoshop and direct which way that gradient's going to go by doing your your drag and cross. So the more closely you do it, the more obvious those choices are. So let's go ahead and go from the top to bottom holding Shift and get a nice straight gradient all the way across. And let's go ahead and play with that a little bit more. With our gradient tool, if we go down here to the bottom, we get a rotate, and we can actually rotate how much that is going to, so you can kind of see it moving side to side. Alright, so if we want to play with it even a little bit more, let's go ahead and go to our fill box and double click on our gradient. Oh, cancel. Go to our gradient options, and right now it's at like 74. Let's go ahead and make it a -60. And it creates that angle for us. We're going to close our gradient, and we hit escape to get out of that isolation mode, and we can kind of see how it's lighter and darker now. It's lighter and darker. And let's do a Control S to save. Let's do an object, and let's come down here to lock and selection to make sure that we don't accidentally move that gradient while we are working on other items. Alright, so let's go ahead and play with some other items. Let's go ahead, this red is really awful. Let's grab the stroke tool and grab that selection tool and grab that stroke right there. So we can actually apply a linear gradient to a stroke. So let's go ahead and go to the stroke box at the bottom of the tools panel. So right here where it's red, make sure that you pull it so the red's on top, and let's apply that gradient, which is the middle one right there. So now it's kind of hard to tell what it's doing right now, but we are going to play with it and make it a little bit better. So let's go ahead and go to our gradient panel. If you don't have it open, go to Window, Gradient, and let's make sure we're on Stroke if you're not already. Stroke is the outline, and we want to leave it as a linear gradient, and we want to apply the gradient across the stroke. So it's this very last one right here. And now you see we get kind of a different frame look, which is pretty cool. But we want to adjust it a little bit more. We can actually add some more colors to this frame. So we're going to go ahead and add another color stop to our gradients. All we have to do is click right here at the bottom and add another color stop. And let's double click it and grab our swatches and make it BG10. So now you see it's using that background color to kind of bring that in. And let's go ahead and escape, get out of that, and let's put that at about halfway. So location at about 50%. You can put that in by hand, or you can drag it until you get it where you want it. So now we can also do some other things to it. Let's go ahead and drag that color stop so we can add another. So we're going to grab this one on the far right. We're going to hit Alt and drag. So we're actually making a copy, and we want to put it at about 25%. So you see how it brings that dark color back in. So we're going light, dark, dark. And if it's not exactly 25%, you can go ahead and type that in. And we get kind of a different look, which is very nice. And we have those 4 color stops. So if we decide we don't like one, maybe we don't want to have this light part here, we can take that color stop and just drag it off, and it'll make it go away. So now we're just kind of going dark, light, dark, which you can kind of see in your gradient right here. All right, we're done with that part. Let's go ahead and close it and do a Control S to save what we have so far. Now we're going to play with some radial gradients in our artwork. So if you notice right now, we've got this really ugly orange thing right here at the bottom. Let's go ahead and do a selection tool and grab that orange. And let's go ahead, and if you need to zoom in, you can. Control plus. So we're going to go ahead and change our fill color to the white black gradient. And we want to go ahead and play with it a little bit more. Let's go ahead and grab our gradient options right here at the bottom. In our gradient options, instead of linear, we want to go ahead and choose radial. So it's going to go ahead and do a circle instead. With our fill. Oh, right now we're doing the stroke instead of the fill. So let's go ahead and make sure you're on the fill and change it to the radial. So you should get that light spot right in the middle. Alright, so from here, we want to go ahead and play with things a little bit more. We want to actually reverse this so the white is on the outside. So instead of changing these around, we actually have this little button right here that says Reverse Gradient. So now we get the light on the outside and the dark on the inside. Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and grab our gradient tool over here on the toolbar, and let's double click, and because we don't want black doesn't really match, let's go ahead and grab our swatches and grab the one that says radial 1, which is kind of that dark brown. All right, and we can escape to hide that panel a little bit. Now let's go ahead and position this and change it just a little bit so we make it work a little bit better with our shape. So let's go right below, and let's add another point to our figure right here. Let's click it right here, and let's double click and make it radial 2. So now we've got that kind of lighter color. And we can go ahead, hit escape, get out of there, or yeah, we want to do that, hit escape. And for our location, let's go ahead and change it to 45%. So you kind of see we get a more direct bullseye going on. So let's do a Control S and say what we've got so far. Now let's go ahead and adjust this so it actually fits the shape, because right now it's made for a circle and we've got an ellipse here. So with our ellipse, our gradient still chosen, we're going to go ahead and grab the edge of this bar, and it should change. Pointer should change, and we should drag so we get kind of a pointer, and we kind of drag this out a little bit bigger so it kind of fills that even better, so we can lengthen that gradient. So let's go to our gradient panel, and let's go ahead and change our aspect ratio. So right now this aspect ratio is made for a circle. We want it to change it to an ellipse. So let's go here to our aspect ratio and change it to 30%. And now you see we actually have a shape that mimics the one that we've got here for our ellipse. All right, let's go ahead, grab our selection tool, and let's make sure that we have selected, and then let's double click the scale tool, and it's going to open up for us, and we want to change that scale, so we want to make sure we're at uniform, and we change this to 80%, and you can preview or not preview, totally up to you, and say OK. So let's go ahead and select, deselect, make sure we don't have anything. Let's do a Control S and say what we've got so far. So let's go ahead and do some stuff with the cake. Let's go to View and fit Artboard and Window so we can see the top part of this cake as well. Let's grab our selection tool, and let's grab our cream colored cake, and let's hit Shift and grab our other cream colored cake as well. So we can do both at once. With our fill color, right now we've got kind of a tannish color going on. Make sure our swatches are selected, and we want to go ahead and choose that background gradient swatch. So we want to make sure that we grab that gradient inset. So now you can see we're actually adding a little bit of depth to that color, which we didn't have before. Let's go ahead and grab our gradient tool, and let's go View, Hide Gradient, Annotator, so that we don't actually have those bars that we would have to deal with before. And we want to drag from the middle of the upper shape down to the bottom. So let's go ahead and drag with our gradient, drag from top to bottom, and you'll see how you get that gradient is now starting to apply to our cake, which is exactly what we want. So we can apply it across multiple shapes at once because we have them both selected. All right, let's go ahead with our selection tool, and let's, with the cake shape still selected, let's do Edit, Copy, and let's do an Edit, Paste in Front. So we're actually going to be applying one effect to the background and one effect to the front. So let's do Object, Arrange, Bring to Front. So we make sure that we are working on just the front copies of that image, so it kind of hides some of the other stuff. So let's go ahead and go to our gradient panel, and let's go ahead and select that black white. So you have to scroll up a little bit and hit black white, because we're going to add a little bit of shadow to our cake. So let's go ahead and do the reverse gradient. So now our top is dark and our bottom is light. And let's go ahead and grab our gradient tool over here on the side. And we want to actually make it so that we have a shadow going over part of the cake right here. So go into about the middle or so. Now it's pretty ugly, but we can still play with that. In our gradient, let's go ahead and change some of these colors around. Let's go ahead and grab that black color stop, and our opacity, go ahead and make it 40%. So we're not looking at it quite as much. And in this other color stop, let's go ahead and make the opacity 0. So now you can see we have that very subtle shadow over the one side of our cake that we didn't necessarily have on the other. Let's go ahead, drag that midpoint over to about 60. So you can see it's going to kind of grab and drag that shadow over just a little bit more. And I can click out and get 60. So let's go ahead and do Object, Hide, Selection. So now you can kind of see how those two work together. And let's do a Control S and save. So now we're going to work with some blended objects. So if you look on the cake itself, we've got these two little funky teardrops. If we look at the end one, we see that those teardrops are actually going to turn into decorations on the cake. And we can do that in a couple of ways. Most traditionally, you'd think, hey, let's copy paste it, but we can let the software do the job for us. So we're going to go ahead and use the blend tool to do that. We're going to go ahead, grab the blend tool. So it's the one that goes from a square into a circle. And let's go over the top of the first thing we want to blend and go over the middle of it. And then we want to click, and then we want to come down here to the second thing we want to blend to, which is the second teardrop, and click. And notice how it automatically blends and creates all of those teardrops for us, which is pretty cool. So it's blending those together. But I don't necessarily need 5 jillion teardrops. So let's go to Object. Let's come down here to Blend. And Blend, let's go to Blend Options. In our blend options, we want to specify the steps, and instead of 42, we want to make it 9. Turn your preview on so you can see what it's doing. So now we have 9 teardrops, which will actually equal 1 for each of these elements right here, and hit OK. So now we want to modify that blend a little bit. Let's go ahead and double click, grab our selection tool, and we want to select anywhere in this blend so we get this area selected. And let's go ahead and go to View Outline, because it's a little bit easier to do this when you're working in outline mode. So what we want to do is move this one teardrop. I'm going to zoom in a bunch, close my gradient for now, because I want to move this one teardrop up to this spot right here. So I'm going to grab it. You want to make sure you're grabbing the item, not the whole path, which I just did. So we want to grab just that one. If we double click, we'll enter the isolation mode. So we're in isolation mode. We should be able to grab just this guy, drag him straight up to kind of the same way the other one is over there. And you notice that the path changed with it. So make sure you're doing that in the isolation mode. So we want to make sure that those teardrops are actually touching the edge of the scallops. So let's go ahead and drag that, make sure you drag the shape. Let's go ahead and grab a select, deselect. So we're letting go of that path. Let's go ahead and grab the pen tool, because we need to curve this path in order to make it go up there. So while we're doing it, we're going to grab our pen, we're going to hit Alt, and I'm going to grab the very middle, and we're going to grab it and drag it straight up to the middle of that scallop right there. I'm going to let go of my mouse, then I'm going to let go of Alt. I'm going to go to View, and I want GPU Preview, and you'll notice that now you've got your teardrops on the edge of those scallops, which I'm pretty happy with. Let's go ahead and do escape to get out of isolation mode. And let's do view GPU preview so we can see the whole thing. So rather than having to put all those elements on one at a time, it was a lot easier just to do it in one fell swoop. Let's do select and deselect and do a Control S to save. Alright, let's do a view, fit artboard and window, and take a peek at this weird thing we've got going on down here, which is the trunk of the cake stand. You'll notice right here. And you'll notice it's got kind of two colors that are blended into each other. So there's a couple different ways to do this. Right now this is drawn as two separate paths. So let's go ahead and zoom in. We can grab our zoom tool and drag across, or you can do it to Control plus and grab those two paths. So let's go ahead, grab our selection tool, grab the first path over here on the left, and then I'm going to shift and grab the path on the right. So now we want to do an object, and we want to come down to blend, and we want to tell it to make. And it's going to blend those two colors together. Now for some of you it might turn into a specified step that might give you 9 of them, which you might not want. We're going to go ahead and fix that if you did get that. Let's double click on our blend tool, and it's going to say what do you want. So if you did specified steps, change it to like 9 in preview, so you can kind of see it made. You can see how it's going together. So we want to go ahead and make it smooth color, so it's going from one to another, and say OK. So let's go ahead and do deselect. That's Control Shift A, or you can go up to deselect. Now I want you to see something kind of cool. If you click just the selection tool of the path on the left, go ahead and go to your fill and make it a bright pink or something. And you can kind of see how that is blending together, which is kind of unusual. So you can kind of get quite a few different things going on. So if we double click it, get into isolation mode, now let's go to our fill color, make it the pink, and you can kind of see how it's blending, and you can make it do quite a few different things if you go into your blend mode. And you can play and change with the two of those and do a couple different things that are pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and escape, and I don't need to see that, so I'm going to do an undo and leave it. Escape again, get out of there, and get out of those two modes. So there's a couple different ways in order to move from one thing to another. Let's do a Control S and save and go back to a view, fit artboard and window, and see the whole thing. So one of the things we can do is paint with patterns. So if we notice our original, we have this pattern on our frame of our cake. So we're going to go ahead and create that cake. Let's go to Object and Unlock All, because remember earlier we locked this so we couldn't accidentally move the background. Let's go Select and give me a deselect. Let's go ahead and with our selection tool, click on that background rectangle. So grab this one right here, and we want to go ahead under Appearance and go to the More options, so the 3 little ellipses, and we want to add some other options. So what you can do is layer things on top of each other like you could in a Photoshop. So let's go ahead and add another fill, add a new fill, so here at the bottom, and in that new fill, which is now our top fill, let's click on it, and let's grab this one called Pompadour. And you'll notice you get this nice swirly pompadour swatch now, which is kind of obnoxious, so let's play with it a little bit. Let's go ahead and play with it just a little bit. Let's hit escape. So if we go here in our appearance panel where it says opacity, let's double click, let's click on opacity, and it's going to open this one called transparency. And in transparency, let's go ahead and change that to 20, the opacity to 20, and it should turn into just kind of a nice subtle pattern for you. So we don't need the appearance panel anymore. We can close that down, and let's go ahead and lock it so we can't mess it up again. Object, Lock, Selection, and we can't move that background, and let's do a file, Save As. So now we're getting close. We're going to play with adding some pattern here to the top of the cake. So if you look at your end one, you've got this pattern here on the cake. You can either do that by trying to draw lines, or you can let the software do the work for you, which is obviously what we want to do. Let's go ahead and change to our other pasteboard, and let's do a view, fit artboard and window, so we see just this X element. So let's go ahead and do a select all on active artboard. It's going to select everything, and this is what's going to be what makes our pattern for us. So Illustrator does some really cool stuff with patterns. And you get to do all kinds of really neat stuff. So let's go to Object, and let's come down here to Pattern, and we want to do Make. So it's going to say a new pattern has been added to our swatches manual. So we say OK, so we can see it there. So within our new swatches, let's go ahead and call this Cake Top. And I want you to take a look at all the different things you can do. If I could spell, it'd be awesome. With this pattern. So right now, tile type is set as a grid. You can change it to brick by row, brick by column. You can change it to hex. You can change the size of those different elements. There's a lot of different things we can do in order to play with these patterns, and it's really, really easy. So let's go ahead and play with it just a little bit. I want to go ahead and just look at one part of my pattern. So instead of copies 5 by 5, I want to change it to 1 by 1. So I can see what just one element of that is going to look like. So let's go ahead and deselect out onto another part so we don't have anything selected. So if I want to add more dots to my pattern, so let's go back to the 5 by 5. So you see I only have dots in part of it. If I want to add more, what I need to do is come here, select that dot, and I'm going to do an Alt Shift and drag. I'm going to drag it just outside. Now I want you to take a peek at something. Because it's not in the tile, when I do my 5 by 5, note that it did not become part of that pattern. So I need to go ahead and switch back to 1 by 1, and I want to make sure that it becomes part of that pattern as well. So in order to do that, I need to click this one right here, Size Title to Art. So now it's going to add that extra element. So let's go ahead and jump up to 5 by 5, and notice that now I have all those extra dots, which is pretty cool. And when I'm done playing with it, I need to hit Done in this top. And let's go ahead and do a Control S to save what we've got so far. Now we need to go ahead and apply that pattern to our cake itself. So let's go ahead down to our bottom, switch our artboard to the previous artboard. Grab our selection tool, grab this top cake, and let's do an Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste in front. So now we have a copy that we're going to be putting that pattern onto. And let's go ahead and grab that cake top pattern from our swatches. And so now we get the blue dots on our cake. Now we can decide, I really hate blue dots. Blue dots does not match anything that I have going on here. Let's do Control plus, kind of zoom in a little bit more. So what I can do is edit that pattern. So I can go in and double click on that pattern, and I can do a Control plus. Let's zoom in. Let's switch it back to 1 by 1. Click this guy and shift click my other blue one. And I'm going to decide I don't want blue dots. I can have brown dots. I can have pink dots. I can do something else instead. So let's go ahead and grab this one called BG. So background, or it's like the background dots. So when you're done with it, say Done. And now we have brown dots on our cake instead of blue dots, which is pretty cool. So they're still kind of big though, and I don't want them to necessarily be quite so large. So we can actually scale them and make them a little bit smaller. So what we're going to do is click, we've got this cake, we need to do this cake top. So we're going to click the cake top shape, and we're going to double click Scale. And we need to change it a little bit. So we want to change our uniform scale to 50%. We want to make sure that Scale Corners is turned off, Scale Effects is turned off, Transform Objects is turned off, but Transform Patterns is turned on. And make sure you've got your preview and say OK. So let's go ahead and do a View, fit artboard in window. We can see the whole thing. Let's turn our object, show all, because we hid a few things. We hid those shadows that we made earlier. And we have created quite a cool effect, and it wasn't very hard. We got to use a lot of those tools to our advantage, which made life a lot easier. All right, let's go ahead and do a file, save as, and turn in, or just save and turn in your final copy. And that's all for this one.